Welcome to another Explainer. Today, we're diving into something that is, honestly, a bit of a historical paradox. We're looking at how a tiny, fragmented island in the North Atlantic, a place that was constantly besieged by invaders, somehow managed to grow into a global superpower. We're going to trace the very foundations of British rule, piecing together the events, the specific strategies, and those really pivotal moments that laid the groundwork for an empire of just unprecedented scale. It kind of forces us to stop and ask this really provocative question. How in the world did a small, besieged island end up conquering a quarter of the globe? Seriously, how did a single European nation eventually come to control parts of the Americas, Asia, Africa, and Australia, taking up a massive chunk of the planet's land and population? The sheer unlikeliness of that outcome is exactly what makes this history so utterly fascinating to unpack. Okay, let's dive into this roadmap to make sense of it all. 1. Uniting the home islands. 2. Mastering the seas. 3. Planting the first flags. 4. The corporate empire. And finally, 5. The dark economics.
Part 1. Uniting the home islands.
You know, before Britain could even think about looking outward across the oceans, it had to secure its own borders. I mean, long before there was a British Empire, there wasn't even a united England. Back in 878 AD, King Alfred the Great was quite literally hiding out in the marshlands to escape invading Danish Vikings. He eventually regrouped, defeated them, and established a foundational peace. Then, building on that bedrock, in 927 AD, his grandson Athelstan successfully conquered rival territories and effectively united England under his rule, becoming the first true king of England. Hundreds of years later, in 1282, King Edward I pushed those borders even further. He used a multi-pronged military strategy and built a massive network of imposing fortresses to conquer Wales and incorporate it into the English kingdom. This internal consolidation, it was the absolute prerequisite for everything that followed.
Part 2. Mastering the seas.
So, as the rest of the world was opening up, with rivals like Spain and Portugal expanding global trade, England realized a fundamental truth. Their survival absolutely depended on mastering the oceans. Cut to 1588, when the Spanish King Philip II sent his terrifying Armada to conquer England. And this brilliantly illustrates the difference in their strategies. On one side, you have the Spanish galleons, these massive, heavily armed vessels carrying thousands of seasoned soldiers. On the other side, the English naval approach, smaller, highly maneuverable, agile ships. Under the command of guys like Sir Francis Drake, the English realized they didn't actually need to match the Spanish in size. They just needed to outmaneuver them.
Picture this, the English faced 130 of these massive Spanish ships. It was a total existential threat. But rather than meeting them head-on, the English used their agile ships to attack from the rear, fire, and retreat. They even sent burning fire ships directly into the Spanish formation, which completely shattered their lines. This stunning David and Goliath victory secured England's naval dominance, which, for sure, became the absolute backbone of their global reach.
Part 3. Planting the first flags. So that naval confidence naturally led to overseas exploration. But their early ambitions vastly outweighed their actual resources. Take the Italian explorer Giovanni Caboto, who sailed for England under the name John Cabot. In 1497, seeking a route to Asia, he set out with just one small ship and a crew of 18 men. That's it. This tiny crew faced incredibly treacherous Atlantic weather, eventually spotting land in present-day Newfoundland. Planting the English flag on that shore was this microscopic, almost humble beginning for an empire that would one day span the entire globe. But hey, planting a flag is very different from actually surviving. Early colonization was unbelievably harsh. The Roanoke colony completely vanished, and at Jamestown, founded in 1607, survival was far from guaranteed. The colonists faced unbearable heat, disease, and starvation. During the horrific starving time in the winter of 1609, they were forced to eat literally anything they could find. Horses, leather, you name it. The whole colonial experiment was, well, actually, scratch that. It was on the absolute brink of total collapse, until settler John Rolfe introduced tobacco cultivation. That crop thrived, bringing sudden, immense financial prosperity and completely turning the tide for English settlement in America.
Part 4. The corporate empire.
Now, the empire wasn't just built by royal decrees, it was massively driven by ambitious, profit-seeking businesses. Enter the chartered company. These were state-sponsored business ventures, granted strict monopolies by the crown. In essence, the English government outsourced the monumental risk and the massive cost of colonial expansion to private enterprises. It's kind of like state-sponsored venture capitalism, this crazy fusion of royal power and corporate ambition. To put that into perspective,
In practice, this meant building economic engines simultaneously across completely different continents. You had the Virginia Company, founded in 1606, driving American expansion at Jamestown and ultimately leveraging tobacco. Meanwhile, over in Asia, the East India Company secured a trading post in Surat, India in 1612, focusing on textiles, spices, and indigo. These companies were concurrent financial giants, just systematically building out the physical and economic infrastructure of a global empire.
Part 5. The Dark Economics. As we evaluate these foundations, we must objectively examine the human cost that made all this massive economic growth possible. The financial triumphs of the empire were deeply, deeply intertwined with systemic exploitation. The historical record shows that figures like John Hawkins were pivotal in initiating the English slave trade. Back in 1562, Hawkins captured hundreds of Africans in Sierra Leone, illegally trading them in the Caribbean for pearls, hides, and sugar. A venture that was so lucrative, he was actually knighted by the crown. As the empire expanded into the Caribbean, taking islands like Barbados and Jamaica, the demand for labor skyrocketed. By 1713, the Treaty of Utrecht granted England the Asiento de Negros, which gave them a highly lucrative, heavily protected monopoly over the transatlantic slave trade.
The sources are completely explicit about the conditions on the ground. Colonial expansion involved severe atrocities, including the massacre of the native Kalinago people in the Caribbean to secure land. And for the enslaved Africans brought over to replace them, the reality was incredibly brutal: systemic exploitation, severe malnourishment, and forced labor of upwards of 18 hours a day under extreme conditions.
So, the crucial point is that this systemic exploitation was the absolute engine of the Caribbean sugar economy, which in turn was a massive driver of imperial wealth. The cultivation process was physically grueling and deadly. Step 1, enslaved people had to clear dense vegetation in heat that often exceeded 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Step 2, manually planting the sugarcane stalks. Step 3, weeding and hoeing across plantations that spanned hundreds of acres, all while digging irrigation canals. And Step 4, harvesting those thick stalks with machetes after 12 to 18 months of growth. It was this relentless, grinding cycle of labor that fueled the empire's sugar production. When we bring the scale of this historical trajectory back into focus, these foundations, from the brilliant naval tactics and early exploration to the powerful chartered companies and the brutal economics of forced labor, ultimately built a global empire that within 4 centuries was worth over $600 billion. That is just an unfathomable amount of wealth. Which brings us to this powerful quote by George Macartney, an Irish-born British governor who perfectly captured the sheer, unprecedented scale they had achieved. He described it as, "This vast empire on which the sun never sets and whose bounds nature has not yet ascertained." From the Americas to India, from Africa to Australia, the strategic foundations laid by a small, once fragmented island had fundamentally reshaped the globe. So what does this all mean for us today? Looking at this incredible expansion, the strategic brilliance, the naval dominance, right alongside the immense human exploitation, what is the true long-term cost and legacy of these historical foundations? It's a highly complex, dual-sided history that continues to shape our modern world in very real ways. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep exploring.